old joke. After the artificial insemination procedure, a cow looks sadly after the veterinarian and moos in her cow language. But what about a chat? Europeans found themselves in a similar situation, only now they will have the opportunity to talk to their heart's content through their representatives in the European Parliament. However, the conversations of the dissenters and revolutionaries will only matter if the press decides to broadcast them, and that is highly doubtful. The majority in the Continental Parliament remains with the European People's Party and its allies. And this is a structure without ideology. It fights for moderate progress within the framework of legality. They, who always agree with the authorities, have more than 400 mandates out of 720. Therefore, the current head of the European Commission is quite confident that she will continue to steer the European ship.
The world is in turmoil. Degenerate forces are trying to destabilize our society and weaken Europe, from both outside and within. We will never allow this. I personally fight for a strong Europe. And the election results show that most Europeans want a strong Europe, just like I do.
The head of the continental government is indeed approved by the European Parliament. But the candidates are first selected by the Council of Heads of State. So it's not certain that the deputies will find the letters Ursula in the names of the candidates proposed by the presidents and prime ministers. Accordingly, von der Leyen might not gather enough support. This, by the way, gives an idea of the powers of the main legislative body of the EU. These powers are purely ceremonial. Deputies are allowed to vote on what they are told, and veto what they are not told. The people's representatives can also pass resolutions, which are non-binding declarations. The only thing deputies are not limited in is the right to argue with each other during parliamentary sessions.
The number of mandates a party has is not everything. In the European Parliament, unity is what matters. For example, French right-wingers will not cooperate with German ones. In the European Parliament, 3 radical factions are more likely to emerge than to merge into one. Why? Because of disagreements over the war between Ukraine and Russia. Different far-right groups have fundamentally different approaches here.
In the Ukraine-Russia conflict, even pro-Russian movements are far from united in their preferences. Neither the Alternative for Germany nor Marine Le Pen's National Rally nor the Austrian Freedom Party are ready to side with Moscow. They only speak for abstract peace and fair relations to both sides of the conflict. And you won't find NATO opponents among the deputies at all. Well, maybe some lone radicals slipped in. In general, no changes should be expected in the European Parliament. Its role and position will remain largely the same. However, for individual countries, the elections were fateful.
The Alternative for Germany is an extreme right-wing extremist party. Now it is the second most influential party after the CDU and CSU. Meanwhile, AfD is the largest party in East Germany. Elections will be held in this part of Germany in the fall, and this is causing serious concern. People are worried about their future, incomes are falling, cities are flooded with migrants. AfD is scoring points on this. So there are no surprises. We knew that the Liberals and Greens were losing. We expected the far right to increase their representation and the Social Democrats to succeed. The success of the Christian Democrats was a bit surprising, but they gained a couple of seats, which is hardly a miracle. At the national level, yes, the success of the right in France was unexpectedly significant.
The success of the right in France was expected in terms of scale, but not in terms of consequences. Yes, they received 32% of the votes against 16% for presidential quarters. Yes, Marine Le Pen's National Rally will send about 30 deputies to the European Parliament. In Brussels and Strasbourg, the parliamentary discourse will become somewhat radicalized, as it is fashionable to say. And that's it. Macron's dissolution of the National Assembly was all the more unexpected. Moreover, new elections will be held on June 30th. This means that the country will enter a pre-election and post-election chaos. New deputies will fight for positions in commissions and committees. Possibly the fall of the current government and the birth of a new one. In the blood and pain that the political class will have to endure. And all this coincides with the Paris Olympics, which was a sacred cow for Macron. Now this cow will obviously have a very hard time. It will inevitably limp and moo in pain. The logic of the French president is hard to understand. Both the right and the left have already internally consolidated. From Macron's majority, there will obviously be no trace left in the assembly. The right alone will take about 40% of the mandates. Since Macron is a rational person, his motives are interpreted differently. Maybe something is about to happen in Europe and France for which the president will gladly shift the responsibility to the parliament. Some particularly acute crisis will occur, a black political or economic swan will arrive, or maybe Macron hopes to declare a crusade against fascism in the form of the National Rally. This has worked before in France, where leftist sentiments generally prevail, but now it seems this is a losing strategy. After all, the right demands not the triumph of fascism, but of common sense.
My dear compatriots, French people in Europe and abroad, our party has gained more than 30%. The French people have delivered their final verdict on the ruling party. The authorities fought us with all their might. The President of the Republic called us the main enemies. But the French demand that the European Union change its direction. We demand more democracy, protection of our rights, and respect for the peoples of Europe.
After last Sunday's vote, the Prime Minister of Belgium also resigned. There, however, this was due to internal political reasons, and the loss in the European Parliament elections was just an excuse. In Germany, the fight for Euro deputy mandates was generally treated like a poll. Its results, though alarming for the establishment, are rather encouraging. The alternative for Germany took 16% of the votes, while 6 months ago it was supported by 22% of Germans. Hence the conclusion. The Scholz government needs to increase the intensity of exposing the fascist nature of the right, and by the main national elections next year the danger will pass. The elites will transfer power from the left social democratic hand to the right Christian democratic one. And everything will be as it was under Grandma Merkel. In Germany, politicians and the people are practical and, unlike Macron, do not allow themselves hysterics. As for the European Parliament, it should be remembered that 800 years ago the English invented the name for the legislative body, taking the French word parler, to speak. And it turns out that Parliament is literally a talking shop. That's what deputies are kept for. Their task is to ensure that citizens do not feel offended for not being talked to. Oleg Romanov on the main broadcast.